The most unique tube line in London is the Northern, having no less than 2 main routes through the centre of the capital. All branches converge at Camden Town, where one heads off to Edgware and the other to High Barnet. At the time of filming, the Battersea branch was not open. It's due to be open in the autumn of 2021. So, our journey will now begin here at Kennington, which opened in 1890 on the City and South London Railway, the very first tube railway in the world. We begin on an empty coaching stock train to sample the Kennington reversing loop off the West End branch. Our 1995 stock train heads away from the Morden branch. The loop was opened in 1926 with the extension from Embankment by the Hampstead Tube. Kennington had at this time only been served by the City and South London Railway, who occupied the central position. The Hampstead Tube was positioned on the outside to provide cross-platform interchange. Although the line could not head south, it needed a way to reverse back towards the West End of London, and therefore this loop was constructed as an alternative. It also provides an easier reversal, with the driver not having to change ends. Trains off the Battersea branch have no connection at all with the Bank branch. Passengers would need to change here and cross over to platform 3. We are now travelling over the former route built by the Charing Cross, Euston and Hampstead Railway, or locally known as the Hampstead Tube. The railway had been a part of the Underground Electric Railways Group when it was formed back in 1902, headed by the American financier Charles Tyson Yerkes, who was responsible for today's Bakerloo, District and Piccadilly railways. This section was an extension southwards from Embankment to Kennington to connect with the City and South London Railway on the 13th of September 1926, the very same day as the Morden branch opened from Clapham Common. Waterloo is the fourth busiest station on the London Underground, with 74.5 million people using the station in 2018. Connections are made with the Bakerloo, Jubilee and Waterloo and City lines, the latter being the second tube line to run services in London, opened in 1898 by the LSWR. In total, the Northern Line is 58 kilometres, or 36 miles long, serves 50 stations and carries around 294 million passengers a year, making this the busiest line on the system. Just here, the line passes beneath the River Thames on the approach to Embankment. Notice the severe curve on the northbound platform. This is part of the former reversing loop that the Hampstead Tube built from its very original terminus at Strand in 1914. The reason why the short section of line opened was to provide better interchange with the Bakerloo Railway.
Mind the gap. Mind the gap.
The distance between Embankment and Charing Cross is the shortest on the line. And so we arrive at Charing Cross, the first terminus of the Hampstead Tube from Golders Green and Archway on the 22nd of June 1907. For 50 years the station was known as Strand and did not have any connection with the Bakerloo line at all, who had their own station at Trafalgar Square, hence why the short extension to Embankment happened in 1914 to facilitate easy interchange, as both routes were owned by the Underground Electric Group. The entire layout was combined together in 1979 with the arrival of the Jubilee line from Baker Street, whose services ran for just 20 years. The City and South London Railway had in fact been a part of the UERL in 1913, and this company and the Hampstead Tube retained their individual identities until they combined to be the Northern Line in August 1937. There's interchange here with the Piccadilly line. Tottenham Court Road lies beneath Oxford Street, and the station took this name for the first year of opening in 1907. The Central line arrived here in 1900, running from west to east. The station is also planned to have Crossrail Elizabeth line services commence running here from either 2021 or 2022. Incidentally, Goodge Street first opened as Tottenham Court Road in 1907. The Northern connects with the Victoria line here at Warren Street. It was formerly known as Euston Road. We are now back at Euston, this time on the West End branch platforms numbered 1 and 2, there being no physical connection with the City branch. Recorded for posterity, the original station building entrance on Drummond Street is due to be demolished as part of High Speed 2 route, which will provide a faster and more direct link between London and Birmingham. This is Mornington Crescent, served by trains on the West End branch only. The station was closed for 5 years from 1992 for total refurbishment, having been in a state of neglect. Part of the works was to replace the 85-year-old lifts, which were life expired.
The next station is Camden Town, High Barnet line. Change here for...
We are now approaching Camden Town, described as the crew of the Northern Line, as all 4 branches converge on the 4 platforms. We pass through the remains of South Kentish Town Station, which opened with the line in 1907. However, due to low patronage on the line, the station closed in 1924. The more popular station of Kentish Town was much better sited, as today it provides interchange with the Thameslink Cross London services.
Tottenham Park.
The long open section between the running lines is where a scissors crossover was located when Archway was the northern terminus of the Hampstead Tube for 32 years. The station first opened as Highgate, being renamed in 1947. The station is still largely in original condition. As like other underground terminuses in London, the tracks continued beyond the platforms. With the extension to East Finchley in July 1939, the southbound tunnel became a centre reversing siding. The extension beyond Archway was part of the London Passenger Transport Board's project, known as the Northern Heights, to take over various lines that had been operated by the London and North Eastern Railway from King's Cross to Barnet and Edgware. The best way to reach the steam services was to tunnel along here to East Finchley. Here at Highgate, the platforms were built to accommodate a train of 9 coaches. These were a feature in the 1930s to tackle the increasing problem of overcrowding. The rear 2 coaches were dedicated to passengers wishing to alight at Tottenham Court Road, so therefore passengers would get on here or at Golders Green on the extended platforms and have an undisturbed journey to the West End, with the rear 2 coaches sitting in the tunnels at most of the other stops. At Tottenham Court Road, the rear 2 coaches will pull forward and the passengers would alight, continuing outer passenger services from there afterwards. The line now rises towards the surface on a rising gradient of 1 in 50 to join the former LNER line from King's Cross. As we emerge from the underground, this marks the end of the longest continuous tunnel in the world if travelling from Morden via Bank at 17.5 miles. The original station of 1867 was swept away and rebuilt by the 1930s architect Charles Holden as part of the Northern Heights plan. Sadly, the project was abandoned in 1941 with the outbreak of the Second World War, and the 2 middle tracks built specifically for main line trains were abandoned, though they still are in use for trains to access Highgate Depot. In fact, East Finchley had been known as East End Finchley from 1867 to 1887.
Usual weather. Where's all the sun?
Tube trains began operating along here to High Barnet with the electrification there in April 1940, running alongside steam trains to King's Cross, Moorgate and Broad Street for a further year. To match the stopping distances with the electric trains, the steam locos had been fitted with trip cocks to conform to the standard underground signalling practice and reduced to 20 miles an hour. The Edgware, Highgate and London Railway was opened on the 22nd of August 1867 and was operated by the Great Northern Railway from the outset. The route was of single-line infrastructure for most of its length to Edgware, but between Finchley and Hendon, now Finchley Central, and Finsbury Park, the line was doubled in preparation for the opening of the High Barnet and Muswell Hill branches in 1870. The A406 North Circular Road passes overhead. We've now arrived at Finchley Central. The platform over to our left is used by the single line shuttle to Mill Hill East, more of which later. The station, dating from 1867, was first called Finchley and Hendon, only to be renamed to Finchley Church End in 1872, retaining its current title with the arrival of the tube line in 1940. A plaque in the memory of Harry Beck is displayed here, as he was the man responsible for the iconic tube map that we see today, and he didn't live too far away from the station. The Mill Hill East branch continues straight ahead, while we turn 90 degrees to the northeast. As previously mentioned, the track was doubled between Finsbury Park and Finchley Central for the preparation of the High Barnet branch in 1870, and it opened 2 years later. West Finchley opened as a halt for the LNER in March 1933 to serve new housing in the area. The pretty little station has not changed much since the day it opened, the only exception being the London roundels and platform height alterations. This is Woodside Park, opening in 1872 as Torrington Park, the prefix being changed 10 years later. One of two signal boxes still stand here, out of use but very much preserved. Today, signalling is controlled by the automatic train operation system at Goodge Street, Euston.
Woodside Park. This is the Northern Line train terminating at High Barnet.
The other signal box that once stood to our left used to control access into the former goods yard, which has now been converted into a car park. Interestingly, the goods yard was owned by British Rail and continued in operation until October 1962, with diesel replacing the steam trains for the final year. The penultimate station on the branch is Totteridge and Whetstone, serving more the latter than the former. We cross the A1000 Barnet Hill. Over to our right are the High Barnet carriage sidings. High Barnet still retains much of its Victorian architecture. Included is the signal box and the former ticket office, now only used by engineer staff. Disabled and wheelchair friendly, a long ramp leads from the station up to Barnet High Street. Back to Finchley Central now for our final trip of the Northern Line, the 1 mile single line branch to Mill Hill East. The single line was electrified to Mill Hill East in May 1941 and has been in this configuration since the day it opened. This route was the original 1867 branch to Edgware via Mill Hill, the Hale. Mentioned in the previous video, the railway was due to link with today's Edgware branch and continue north to Bushey Heath as part of the New Works programme first instigated in 1935. However, World War II caused all work to be stopped and the project was cancelled when a new Greenbelt legislation severely restrict any more building in the area. The line now crosses the Dollisbrook Viaduct. Reaching nearly 60 feet above ground, it is the highest point on the London Underground. How interesting to think that we also ran through the lowest point at Hampstead. And so we arrive at Mill Hill East, one of a few single-line platforms remaining on the Underground. The others are at Chesham on the Metropolitan, Heathrow Terminal 4 on the Piccadilly, and Kensington Olympia on the District. The tracks of course did continue beyond Mill Hill East, with certain passenger and goods trains remaining in operation until August 1964.